Please welcome to the stage the Senior Vice President of Strategy for SCORE, Mary Cypress Metz.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here with you this morning. I am very excited to lead our next discussion. In just a moment, I'm going to invite up a really great team of panelists for our discussion. But before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit of context before we dive into this discussion. We spent this morning on our panel and in your breakout sessions talking about the opportunities, the challenges, the needs around connecting education and workforce and education and economic opportunity. We have prioritized this as a state. We are prioritizing this as a state. And that gives us so much opportunity for students, for Tennesseans to realize the economic opportunity of our state. At SCORE, our goal is for every Tennessee student to have the opportunity to earn a degree or credential that prepares them for a career that enables economic independence. That's really important. And we know that as a state, we have prioritized ensuring more students earn degrees and credentials. We heard this morning about what percentage of the workforce will need a degree or credential to meet workforce needs. In Tennessee, that number is 63%. And over the last 10 plus years, we have grown the number of Tennesseans to where we're at about almost 49% now. And that's really important. That's tremendous progress going from 33% over 10 years ago to now 49% almost. But there's one thing we don't know about that yet. We don't know, are those degrees and credentials the ones that are connected to what workforce needs? And how can we ensure and better ensure that students have the opportunity to earn those degrees and credentials that are aligned to our workforce needs? We haven't had the ability to be able to know that yet, but we believe that now we do, that we can confidently tell Tennesseans what they can expect from those degrees or credentials. And so with that in mind, SCORE set out to develop a framework that could help us understand that, could help us understand which degrees and credentials and how do degrees and credentials prepare students for careers that enable economic independence. So that when a student is on a pathway, we can know, does that pathway lead to economic opportunity for them in terms of wages and job outlook? We can help more students know what outcomes they should expect and support them on pathways that they want to pursue using that information. So we brought together stakeholders from post-secondary education, from K-12 education, from industry, from workforce, from student support organizations to help us really understand what is the impact we want to see from our degrees and credentials, and how can we know if they're having that impact today. And this group looked at what have other states done to understand that. We looked at what data do we have as a state to understand that in order to really come up with a definition for Tennessee. And so in true SCORE fashion, we started with data. We partnered with the University of Tennessee Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research to understand what are the different ways we could know impact of credentials and degrees in Tennessee. What measures do we have? And you see, in just a moment, you'll see a whole list of those measures on the screen here that they were able to help us understand. And we had these stakeholders together sitting around a table looking at these and discussing what really matters. And there were a few themes that came out of that. One, the quality of the information on each of these measures isn't all the same. And so we really wanted to understand, where do we have good information and the best information to drive that? Two is that a single measure is not going to tell us everything, and that we need to have multiple measures to really understand what are the outcomes of degrees and credentials. And so we took that data and we aligned on 3 measures that felt like a really important place. And David mentioned this morning, to create a framework, an impact credential framework that looks at degrees and credentials against 3 different measures: earnings, job outlook, and stackability. Knowing that we want the earnings that you're receiving after earning that degree or credential to ensure that you're able to meet your needs here in Tennessee. We also know that there have to be jobs available in that field. And so we looked at what are the job opportunities connected to those degrees and credentials. And finally, we looked at stackability and prioritized that because we know that the first degree or credential you earn often isn't the last degree or credential you earn, and that we are very intentionally able to build upon those degrees and credentials in really important ways. We, as a group, discussed that it's really important to have kind of a minimum bar of what is important here in Tennessee. And on the left here, in each of those categories, you can see a minimum threshold for those, for the earnings that it needs, that are needed in Tennessee, for the job outlook, and this consideration for stackability. But we wanted more information than that as well. And so using data, we also arrived on what is the whole spectrum of outcomes that we want to be able to see, and how can we understand and create a framework that helps us understand that across all degree and credential types. And so we created a tiered approach here. And again, this is not prescriptive, but this is a starting point to start the discussion using data around what are the outcomes that we want to see for the state, so that we can begin to align on where are there opportunities to advise students using this, where are there opportunities to build pathways towards these opportunities, how can industry help co-create those pathways, how can we align incentives and resources to those pathways. And this framework gives us an important ability to do that. We also know that this framework doesn't tell us everything, and that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today, as well as how we could use this framework, but there's limitations to it. First, this data that we use to build this framework is based on projections. What jobs might you get if you have this degree or credential? Which ones should you get? But not actually looking at occupational information that we need to collect as a state to be able to know what jobs are Tennesseans actually getting after earning these degrees and credentials. We wanted a framework that could be applied to all degree and credential types, from non-degree credentials to associate's degrees to bachelor's degrees and otherwise. But one of the limitations of this is we don't today have much information on non-degree credentials, and there's lots of opportunities to enhance the information that we have on that so we can apply the framework there as well. We talked about stackability, and we need to continue to think about our definition for stackability to be able to do that. And finally, on job demand and job outlook, we live in a very diverse state, which is amazing, but the job outlook statewide doesn't necessarily match what the job outlook looks like from region to region in our state. And so there's opportunity to consider regional relevance as well. And so with this in mind, this framework that gives us a lens so that we're no longer leaving it up to luck for students if they're going to earn a degree or credential that prepares them for a career that enables economic independence. We're giving a framework that can help guide that now. This is a lens we can apply, and we've got to continue to enhance the data to be able to do that. And so I'm really excited to invite up a wonderful panel for us to discuss a little bit about opportunities to do that and to connect education and work through data. So I'll invite up our panelists now.
Joining Mary Cypress, please welcome our panel. Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Denise Thomas. Chief Data Ecosystems Officer at Strata Education Foundation, John Furr. Co-Director, Harvard Project on Workforce, Natalie Gazzaneo. Executive Director, Tennessee Higher Education Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Gentile.
Okay, as we all get settled, I'm excited about this conversation. We have a wonderful panel here, so we're going to spend the next little bit diving into this a little bit, but I would love to start just going down the row, and we'll start here with you, Commissioner. Would love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself and then also share the role you're playing right now in supporting education to workforce success in Tennessee. And we'll start with you, Commissioner, and then we'll go down the row, but would love for you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I had to check to make sure. Always happy to be here with the SCORE team. I think they do amazing work, so thrilled to be here. I'm Denise Thomas, Commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. And you know, in short, I think for us, it's kind of not just built into our name, but it's built into our core mission. to make sure that we're really keeping an eye on the health of Tennessee's workforce and how the progression from where one sits now to ultimately where they need to be. So not only individuals can thrive, but also our state maintains its competitive edge is really baked into our charge. And education and workforce, I will tell you, it's more than just two buzzwords. There's a lot that happens in the middle there. And I'm thrilled that so many of the partners that I get to work with are in the room today. One right across from me and Chancellor Tidings and others, because education and workforce are not these two disparate bookends that they used to be. They are up close and very central to each other. So for labor, we have to make sure, although we're not the educators, that we're influencing curriculum and things that need to happen to make sure that individuals who need to really take the opportunities that are afforded through economic development, they're ready for those. And so, part of what we do outside of funding some of these educational opportunities is really collecting some of the state's data and also drawing emphasis in influencing where it needs to go. And things like apprenticeship, which we'll talk a little bit about more later, all of those are really core sort of service offerings that are baked into the department. And so, we again do this in partnership. I want to, if you don't hear anything else from me today, labor does this as a part of a collaborative. I think if we're honest, not one entity that's up here or out there can do this work alone. And so that's really where we sit. And I'm happy to unpack more of this as the conversation continues.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Furr with Strata Education Foundation. Strata is a national foundation that our sole focus is on clearing the path between education and opportunity. My role at Strata is to help our work around data and clear outcomes. We're very involved in assessing where all states are in their education to employment data systems, but more importantly, really wanting to support states to make progress to build out better education to employment systems. And that's really driven by a belief that we have that everyone needs and deserves clear outcomes data to make informed decisions about their post-secondary education and training options. And as our post-secondary education training systems become more fragmented, more nonlinear, that data challenge is both more difficult but more urgent. So I think that's kind of what we're excited to talk about today, or what might be some strategies to better connect up that data about learners to make sure that you understand what credentials are having impact, but how learners are making progress across that journey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie from the Project on Workforce, and we are a collaborative cross-school initiative that aims to produce research to practice insights on a mission to help creating a post-secondary system of the future that can help create more and better pathways to economic mobility. And part of our mission touches on something that Mary shared, that is a takeaway that they also arrived at when they were thinking about this framework, which is there are so many data and evidence gaps in this space. And policymakers, researchers, practitioners, educators, none of us have the luxury to act without this crucial information. So we are on a mission to help fill this gap, and not just as part of long-term research, but hopefully as part of research that can inform action right here and right now.
Thank you. It's an honor to be in front of you today. And I just want to apologize for earlier practicing my beatboxing. I did a cappella in college. I was just inspired, but I'm going to apologize for that. So I serve as the executive director of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And I had the distinct honor of getting to coordinate policy on behalf of the state among our systems of UT and TBR, as well as our 6 locally governed institutions and our private institutions as well. When I think about our role in the education to workforce pipeline, I think of it in three areas. First of all, as President Randy Boyd mentioned earlier, we do lead the nation in the amount of financial aid we give out per student in the country. Tennessee Promise, Hope Scholarship, Tennessee Reconnect, dual enrollment grants that now combined eclipse Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect investment. So it is incumbent on us as an agency under the access group that we have, and in partnership with the AIRS Foundation, Nicewater, Tennessee Achieves, and others across the state, to make sure that students know what the right pipelines are to make sure they have access to that financial aid, and then they can invest it into a career going forward. Second, our institutions love data. They digest it. They want to use it to help inform where they're going next. We work in partnership with Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Reynolds of TDOE to hammer out the supply and demand needs across our state from a statewide perspective and then regional, and connecting this back to education programs and needed education programs. Then third, during the Lee administration, Governor Lee and the General Assembly have given north of $170 million towards the GIVE, Governor's Investment in Vocational Education, and SPARK grants, supporting post-secondary access to rural communities. And our role in that process is to make sure that we can align K-12, higher education, and the local workforce to provide opportunities for students as early as 9th grade and 10th grade through college to access high demand fields.
Thanks for that, Stephen, and thank you all for sharing the role you're playing in this, which is so critical. And I appreciate your focus on collaboration, Commissioner Thomas, because that's so central to all of this. In a moment, we're going to dive into some of these threads that each of you mentioned around data and connecting outcomes and the opportunities we have in Tennessee today and how we can enhance those. But before we do that, I have one more quick lightning round down the aisle. I just talked about an impact credential framework that we've each spoken about before, and I would love for you each to share. Maybe Stephen will start. You're in this time and work our way back, but how can an impact credentials framework and really this concept of if you could understand the impact of a degree or credential, how could that help us better connect education pathways to economic opportunity in Tennessee? Here you go, Stephen, and work this way.
I forgot I was the caboose up here. And thinking about how to better use that framework, I think of it in twofold. First of all, with the students, I'm helping our students navigate towards credentials that will set them up well in life. But also, and I was a part of the group that worked with SCORE on this, and what it excited me about this is how it could also inform higher education, specifically in thinking about stackability. How can we better link the credentials that we have in a diverse array of institutions to be sure that students can go from, say, TCAT Athens onto ETSU and further to further their career and their education in a way that makes sense? And thinking about job growth, how can we ensure that our students have the critical skills that are needed to put them into fields that are going to be growing, not just now, but 10 years, 15 years down the line? So from my perspective, it's informational, not just to students, but also institutions as they do their planning on where to invest going forward.
I think as someone who's also like operating in this space of being meaningful to different stakeholders, so making sure that our research is intelligible and actionable for business leaders, educators, policymakers, and others. What I feel like really enthusiastic about the framework is about its generative potential. I think when you sit in a multi-stakeholder table to think about a framework and you are confronted with a question like, does this pathway, does this credential really put people on track of good career outcomes? I think this is more than a brainstorming prompt. It becomes a call to action. So even before the implementation, and implementation is so important, I think if you're a business leader, you're immediately thinking, okay, how can I go back to the office tomorrow and make sure that I am creating the good opportunity that this framework is aiming to create? If I'm an education leader, I'm at the same time thinking about my curriculum and question if I'm creating the on-ramps to the good opportunities that we just discussed. So I feel like we're very like optimistic about these not being only just like a static way about thinking about how to collect data, but also creative of the very impact credentials that it aims to measure.
I love frameworks like this to drive action and to drive policy, and they're so critical. And from a data system standpoint, there is no recipe for failure for building an integrated state data system than not knowing what questions you're actually trying to answer. So I think that's what the framework helps you to address. What is it we're trying to get at? What is it we're trying to know? But I think there's opportunities for state of Tennessee, I know we'll talk more about, where you can enhance your data systems to really bring that framework to life, right? How do you kind of go beyond baseline data you have now to get into more nuanced understanding about the credentials, about the employment impacts? And that's what I'm excited to talk with you all more about today.
Yeah, I think when we talk about educational workforce outcomes, we're all trying to get individuals to a place of economic and financial independence. there's no better way to get an individual to independence than to give them the information they need to make their own decisions. And so I think a framework like this brings transparency. You know, how often individuals are trying to make decisions with very limited and confusing information about, well, where does a pathway lead? Well, what do I need to get there? Well, how will that move if I start at a TCAT and I end up at a four-year institution? Or is this the right occupation for me? Is it in demand? There's all these things to be considered. And so when you put that information in a very transparent fashion, now I can take ownership of my own path and where it goes. And I think that's very important. The second thing I'll say is that it also brings a practicality to the work. So whether you're a business or an institution or the individual or a parent who's trying to advise their kids at home, everyone now has the information they need to be able to activate from where they sit. And I think that is really exciting.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you, Commissioner. We're talking about how do you prepare Tennesseans and students for the workforce. And so help us understand the state of the workforce in Tennessee today. Share a little bit about that with us, and then also how you see connecting education and workforce data as a potential opportunity to better address some of the challenges you may see in the workforce today.
Yeah, I think when we look at our workforce, I have to talk about sort of the tale of two tapes. And one is we look at our labor force participation. I think the governor called it stubborn in his State of the State address, which I think was absolutely right. He's my boss, so I wouldn't say if it was wrong. But I think stubborn was a very good way to talk about it, right? We've seen it sort of go up and trickle down, and then it's static, and then it moves again. And I think the other thing is the unemployment rate. And those of you that have heard me say that I think both of them tell or are part of a bigger story. Because whereas we all, appreciate low unemployment, the workforce participation is the one that really keeps me up at night, because it is the best indicator of individuals in your state actually, whether it's degrees, credentials, whatever, are they activating that in work? Are they going to work? Are they participating in the workforce? And so that number really lends itself to say that we still have a lot of people that are on the sidelines, and we need to better understand why. Is it a matter of preparation? Is it a matter of lack of skills, or are there other things that are much bigger conversations just than the one today? But when I look at our job creation, you think about over 250,000 jobs over the last few years. I mean, we have a thriving economic development engine in our state. And when we look at our labor force participation, we can see very clearly there's a gap. And that should unnerve most of us, not in a way that we feel fearful, but in a way that we say we really got to connect some dots here so that individuals really have a very clear path to take advantage of the economic viability and mobility that's been afforded to us in Tennessee. And so when I think about the state of the workforce, I'll say there's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think conversations like this, which are really great to have, we really have to have not just a call to action, but we got to act. But we have to act responsibly. We know that there are obviously opportunities that require four-year degrees and beyond, but there are also occupations and sectors that may not get you the six-figure income, but it helps you be able to earn and start to get some of the durable skills you need to be a player in workforce. And I think we have to span the entire gauntlet in Tennessee. We have to think about the person that is in Commissioner Reynolds and Deb, the folks that the work that you guys are doing in K-12. We have to think about that student. And we also have to think about that adult that's looking to reskill, upskill, or gain skills. We don't have the luxury to really rest on any particular group. We have to think about everyone. That is a really big charge. And that's why all of us are in this room, to try to do it better. And so, that's kind of the high level state of the workforce. I think underneath it, though, if any state can solve this, it's Tennessee. We have the right people. We got the right resources. We have tremendous amount of passion and expertise that we can apply. And I think this framework is a testament, Mary Cypress, of what happens when people are engaged and willing to sit down and almost be vulnerable. Because I'll be the first to tell you, labor does not have it figured out. But one of the things labor is willing to do is sit at the table and learn and do. And I think we have to have that mantra in Tennessee that collectively we can come up with a blueprint that people are talking about how to model the work that we're doing here in our state. And I am not shy about saying that's what I want. I want Tennessee to be the model to say, this is how you do education and workforce in a state. This is how you move people from no mobility to upward mobility, and you do it responsibly. So it's a lot, Mary Cypress, but I'm absolutely charged to do this work and thrilled that we get to talk about it.
I think that sets the tone for this conversation and the rest of the day, and I appreciate that and appreciate that charge. And I know we've all talked about how to be able to realize the potential we have here in Tennessee, we've got to really look to data and have the information to help us make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And if we're going to come around the table together, which we all need to, how are we looking at critical information? And so I want to spend this next little bit talking about where there are opportunities to really ensure that we have that information. And Natalie, I'll go to you next. We have a lot of information in our state about workforce, about education, but there's more information that's needed. And so what are some actionable steps, Natalie, for workforce leaders to contribute to this data integration and ensure that we have the information that we need?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'll get to workforce leaders specifically, but I think for all stakeholders in the spirit of keeping these like multi-stakeholder, have to think about data readiness, of course, and have to have like a joint conversation around how can we leverage the personnel that we have to integrate and create data? How can we leverage the infrastructure that we have, the tech knowledge that we have? How can we leverage and we can create the governance around how to share data? And a very crucial aspect our pillar of data readiness is how do we collaborate across data? And this really takes me to my thinking on workforce leaders specifically, because they are such a natural, good local connectors. So when I think about a clear next step for them or action item for them is double down on this role as a local connector to really foster data conversations and data collaboration, data integration. And in our own research, these local connector role of workforce leaders was evident like several times. And I'll just like share two very quick examples to kind of illustrate that. So a couple of years ago, when we released a book that Rachel Lipson and Bob Schwartz co-authored, doing case studies of community colleges that are doing a particularly good job at creating on-ramps to quality jobs, it became clear that one thing that is community colleges do especially well is being very thoughtful at prioritizing specific industries and specific occupations. And how can this be achieved? By a combination of using labor market information, but not alone. It's not only about data. The leaders of these organizations, they are constantly interacting and forging strategic relationships and networks with industry in spaces that are like a typical, workforce leaders-led spaces like chambers of commerce. Another more recent example, we recently released a brief on state-level emerging practices, leveraging the workforce development potential of federal investments in industrial policy. And again, the role of workforce boards and job centers became very clear as local connectors and as the creators of these networks between different stakeholders, particularly education and industry stakeholders, to share practices, but also to share data and resources around how to get better at leveraging data for good outcomes purposes.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's such a helpful reminder of, where this education and training is coming from is different. It's in community colleges, it's in workforce training centers, it's in communities, it's in four-year higher ed institutions. But Stephen, I'm going to come to you next, and thinking about the higher education landscape in Tennessee, which does play such an important role in being the kind of on-ramp into the workforce for so many Tennesseans. What role does data play in making connections towards student career opportunity and outcomes here in Tennessee?
There's a whole host of ways that data can play at helping students. First of all, on our College for TN website, where we help break down all the data that's out there to help students and advise them on where they can go and what they can access and what can come out on the other end of that should they make that pursuit. That's critically important. Second, and I want to thank Commissioner Thomas, Florida, Chancellor Florida Tidings, President Brian Nolan as being on the data frontier side of things, to not be scared of data. We are excited that we're in the final arrangements right now of being able to submit our post-secondary education data to the U.S. Census Bureau and be able to track where our degrees are going after. Thank you, Amanda Lefane, our Chief Strategy Officer on that.
Yeah.
Be able to track where our students are going after they graduate. It's something exciting for me to be able to see, are we losing students of certain credentials to other states? How can that inform on where we need to go with our workforce in the future? And then the small things, but are not that small, but helps our commission make decisions when we approve our academic programs. We just recently started putting in SOC codes, the occupation codes on our academic program approval process so that we know, institutions know, when students graduate, these are the occupations they can expect to go into. So going on the front end, eyes wide open, data is our friend. Data is not an enemy. It will help us better understand what we are helping our students pursue.
Thank you so much for that. And I appreciate hearing about kind of where are there opportunities where we're going in Tennessee. And I see John itching to dive in. But before we do that, I'm going to go back to you, Commissioner Thomas, one more time. When we think about what are opportunities on the horizon, we've heard all morning about some of the really important work Tennessee has done to prioritize education and economic development and workforce training here in Tennessee already, which is incredible. And I was excited earlier this week in the Governor's State of the State and the release of the proposed budget around lots more opportunities to connect that. I would love if there's anything you'd want to share with this group about where we're going and could be going before we dive into kind of opportunities further.
Yeah, I think we've been sort of working in this clandestine fashion for some time about really how we galvanize our partnerships. I heard Commissioner Reynolds earlier today talk about the silos and really the meticulous work that we've been doing to really bring those down. And I have to say, listen, silos has gotten a bad name, but you have to have experts in their spaces. I can't be Chancellor Tidings. I can't be Commissioner Reynolds. I can't be Dr. Gentile. So silos are necessary because you have to be head down and get the expertise you need for your area. I think where Tennessee has an incredible opportunity, and this is what I'm so excited about, is we're saying, okay, here's the thing, go to your silo, be the expert in your lab. Just don't forget to look up and go visit the other folks in their labs and think about your collective experiments together. And that's where we find ourselves now in Tennessee. And so, what you heard the governor really talk about or introduce is where we are right now under this whole concept of Tennessee Works and accelerating the workforce, accelerating the initiatives that we've talked and spent so much time behind closed doors talking about. You're going to see a realization of that and what it looks like. It doesn't mean that labor won't keep its core charge and education won't keep its core charge and TBR and THEC won't have that core charge. But what you're going to see is an adoption that we collectively have a charge together for our state. And this will be a blueprint on how each of us will take our expertise, our resources, our data, and our technology and align it in a way that it meets the needs for every single Tennessean. And so as we develop this, because listen, I want you to know that this is a framework, but it's not completed. There are other folks we got to talk to, their industry chambers, their employers. There's all sorts of groups that we need to engage to help put more meat on the bone. But what this will be is, at least for the amount of time I've been in this work, this will be the first time that Tennessee will actually present an embodiment and a framework that says this is our new normal. And guess what? It will outlive the people in the role because we've all had really good partnerships and relationships, but when someone moves on, you start all over again. This will be our opportunity to put down legacy stakes in the ground to say from now on, this is how Tennessee does business. It's done it in a way that's very intentional, very collaborative, and it's a framework that we all can say we built. It's not labor building it and saying, Chancellor, how about you come along and join labor? It's saying, no, you own it, I own it, Dr. Gentile owns it, and guess what? Everyone in this room will own it. And that's what I think is so exciting, and that's what the governor has really been challenging us to do for some time, and I'm happy that we'll get to do this during his administration. And so this will not only inform how we go about supporting new and existing economic development projects, but also thinking about what are the credentials that are needed for existing businesses so that small, medium, and large businesses can take advantage of this. So there's something for everyone baked into this. And I'm excited that we get to continue to do this work. And you're going to be hearing more and more as we release initiatives under this sort of one core banner as the state of Tennessee.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm very excited about that and looking forward to it. So, John, zoom us out a little bit. We've been talking about Tennessee, and would love for you to talk about what you've seen across the country. What lessons can Tennessee learn from what other states have successfully done in integrating education and workforce data to ensure opportunity?
Great. Thanks, Mercedes. I just want to touch on, first of all, just to applaud you for being part of the census-related project. It's a real national asset, and that allows you to see national employment outcomes by program, by institution, by campus for those completers. But I really want to encourage you, if you're not extending beyond the UT system, you border a lot of states here in Tennessee. So your two-year colleges need to be part of that project as well to make sure that you can see those employment outcomes for where they might be going to other states beyond Tennessee for those impacts. But I really want to talk about two potential areas of focus that we've seen nationally where there's opportunities. I think Tennessee can improve its data systems to really bring the credential impact framework to life. One's on the employment data side, and the second's on the credential side. So when you think about for the employment data side, Tennessee's wage records, like most states, you can know some things about a person. You can know like who's their employer, you know where that employer's state headquarters is, you know their quarterly wages, but you don't know what job they're in. You don't know where the worker actually works. Are they working at the hospital headquarter location, or are they at a regional facility there? And you actually don't even know their pay rate. You kind of know a quarterly lump sum amount, but you can't get at the hourly rate information. So those are gaps. Again, you are not alone, but there's good news in this, and that we've seen almost half of states are collecting information elements that get at least some of those questions. And we've got 10 states that are rolling up their sleeve and they're saying, we're going to pull in that job title information and we're going to understand that direct connection of if we have a program that actually says it's training to an occupation that we think is going to lead to certain labor outcomes, are people actually going into that occupation? And how are we getting the data to be able to do that? So you would not be forging new path here. Other states have done that with their employers' blessings and strong support. You can't flip the switch. You can't do that overnight. It takes time to build out those systems, but there is a definite path, I think, for Tennessee to grow, to be part of that leading cohort of states that's forging the path, and we're working with a number of national partners to support states that are moving down that road. The other thing I think it's important you to focus on is thinking about the fragmentation of post-secondary across all credential types, right? That's what we're seeing on a national landscape. And you need to be within the community college systems nationally. There's about 10 million students in our two-year systems nationally. Of those 2 million, about 2.5 million or a quarter on an annual basis are in non-credit workforce training programs. And unfortunately, nationally, we know next to nothing about who those students are and what those outcomes are. But again, we are seeing many states that are building out the systems to collect that data on who is actually participating in all of the non-degree credential programs that are either touched or funded by the state or that are offered through those two-year systems, right? If they're offered through your institutions, you need to be able to think about how do you build the data collection systems to be able to bring that in. And that's also a challenge for the UT system as well, because four-year continuing ed is another way that a lot of people are earning credentials where we need to have data that's on that. And the last area where there's opportunity is there's opportunity in that third-party credential space. We're seeing more and more interest in industry certification data and professional certificates that can be done online, and private workforce training. And that's a gap that Strata has been actively tackling. We, in the last couple of years, have launched a new national nonprofit data trust called CredLens, CREDLENS, but this aspires essentially to be the equivalent of the National Student Clearinghouse in many ways, but for that type of third-party credential data. And that can be a source of the information that actually can connect in with your state systems to be able to understand those credential impact outcomes. So again, both of those strategy areas on the employment data and the credential data infrastructure is not something that you can do overnight, and that's a journey, but I would really encourage you to kind of start that journey as soon as you're able to.
Thank you for sharing that. That's exciting. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in how we can continue to, we have great data as a state. How can we continue to have more and use it even more effectively to continue to drive these outcomes? So thank you for that. Natalie, similar question to you, knowing that you're looking across the country and you're looking internationally even, and are there practices and lessons learned that Tennessee should be considering in integrating our data systems?
John just shared some of the ones that I'm also like very enthusiastic about, and Dr. Stephen as well. So I just want to double down like on these partnership with the census. It's super interesting. It removes duplication. It's smart. It removes like the admin burden and like in finding these dots and connecting these dots. But I want to pin down another very well-known and powerful initiative at the national level, which I found like really fascinating. I really like, which is the college scorecard, right? Imagine something like that for the additional credentials that John was just talking about beyond the traditional four-year college degree. Imagine something like the college scorecard or something like what Credlens is doing, very upfront, very ambitious, that could show what are the impacts of these additional credential types on people's outcomes by connecting this data with things like IRS tax information, by connecting the occupations where these students go to, these learners and workers go to, with the Bureau of Labor Statistics projections on occupations that are expected to grow over time and that are promising. I think this is something that, you know, we have a seed and something like really powerful with the college scorecard, but think of like a workforce training scorecard and how powerful and informative it can be. So I really like to pin down the college scorecard as a great initiative. Already exists.
Thanks. So we're talking about the data and how we could use it, but I'm wondering, and John, I'll come back to you. What are the policy levers and where are there opportunities at the state level to be able to better integrate that and do some of the things you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Strata, we published in 24 the state opportunity index, which frames where all states are, including including you all, like where you stand in relation to Strata's pillars. But for the data related work, our policy framework looks at 4 key functions we think that every state education and employment data system should have. It needs to be able to collect the right data, to integrate that data, to be able to provide it out to stakeholders and lead it to impact. So for collection, I just touched on our key collection emphasis around collecting the right wage record information and that non-degree credential data. As you think about how to be able to integrate the data together, you need a modern cloud-based architecture that allows your data to be integrated across your education to employment systems, that allows for ready access, answers to questions when you need to be able to have it. And so I know there's good work that's happening here, and continuing to building on that is important. As you think about how data is provided out, that's where we're seeing some shifts. And we encourage states to think about how do you provide data for multiple audiences, including researchers, including interactive dashboards for guides and for tools. But also in the future, and actually now, most Tennesseans that are getting information on education and workforce are doing it through a chatbot, right? They're going to a chatbot and saying, what's a good program for me? What should I do? And what are the outcomes associated with it? And the number of people that will go to chatbots versus your state dashboards is multiples of thousands, if not millions. So that's a role that states have to play, though, to say, how do we create strong aggregate but open data sets that the robots can read that actually are going to support those chatbot interfaces? And that's a strong space that we're seeing for policy work and working with states to get at that directly. And the last thing I'll say from the impact framework, from a policy standpoint, you need to build state capacity to actually use that data, right? You need organizations like Tennessee Score that are power users of your data for sure, but you also need to have that state capacity and building out the offices and the ability to use that to help make sure that you can continue to refine the impact framework that you've developed, and that you can build new policies off of that data as well.
Thanks. Really interesting considerations there. And I know we're getting close to time here, but I have a couple more things I want to dive in on, and even building off of that. Maybe, Stephen, I'm going to come back to you, and knowing what a critical role higher education plays in preparing our students for workforce needs, from your lens, how can higher education better prepare students to enter education to workforce pathways that lead to impact credentials and these opportunities, if that's the path that they choose? What are those opportunities in higher ed? How can some of these advising and the programs they choose, how can some of these opportunities really help do that through higher ed?
Well, higher education has done a phenomenal job of making it very difficult to understand higher education. That's true from applying financial aid to seeking out the pathways, even if there are clear pathways. That's higher education's opportunity. We have a diverse array of institutions across Tennessee, over 50 public institutions, all coming together to work together as one to do just that. That will forever be what we need to do. I think about, we mentioned Tennessee having such great opportunity here. The data forward element of Tennessee Board of Regents, what they've been doing in connection with labor. When I think about places like the Sycamore Institute, who explain the seemingly unexplainable very well, that's what higher education needs to focus on. How do we explain to students, this is your pathway forward, this is how you can do it and how you can be successful later on. But again, our strength is our diversity of institutions. Our challenge is making sure that we all work together to paint that picture for our students. And data is one way of doing that, but changing that data into information that's helpful to students. That's where we've got to focus our effort.
Thanks for that. And I think part of that communication is engaging the workforce, employers. And Commissioner Thomas, how would you say that we can make the case to for employers to engage in using and contributing education data to help inform these decisions, and engaging in how are we ensuring that these pathways are seamless?
Yeah, I think the previous panel, the gentleman talked about employers being co-producers of talent. I thought that was a very, very powerful statement. I often tell our folks is, thinking about business as a partner and not just a consumer. How we build out frameworks with employers' information in mind. I've said this quite often. If you go to an employer and you ask them for input and you do nothing with it, they're not going to waste their time telling you anything else again. So when they share with you that these are things that we need, how do we think about incorporating that both into our formal education systems, but also giving credence to the fact that employers have a lot of informal learning systems within their walls? And how do we provide some validity to that, and really understanding what data that we can extract from employers outside of just the stereotypical wage data? And I hear you, it's usually lagged and it doesn't tell us a whole lot. And that's something we've been talking about, is we've been really building a coalition of support with employers so that when we ask them to sort of report more things to us, it doesn't look like an arduous task, but we're actually saying the more data that we can get you to supply to us, we can then reverse engineer that data to help create a better picture of how we can do things like curriculum development and workforce planning for you, so you get a better quality workforce. And so that is one of our opportunities moving forward, is to make sure we have the job level data, that when the collection is happening, if we're going to ask employers, ask them for everything you kind of need at one time. And so I think by doing that, we can then sort of back into where do we see more gaps, and where do we think we need to be a little bit more strategic on designing, whether it's certificate programs or industry recognized credentials for employers, that they then can kind of project a little bit better about supply on their side. And I think just lastly, Mary Cypress, I'll say, we very early at the department before the pandemic got involved in the multi-state data collaboratives. Very early, because, as you mentioned, Tennessee borders a lot of states. And for us, it was important to know, for the talent that's leaving Tennessee, if they're trained here, where are they going? And it was really just something that we kind of jumped into to just say, we feel like we need to start getting ahead of the curve, because the states around us were certainly doing it. Kentucky was doing it. Arkansas was doing it. The Midwest states were doing the best job at it. And I think the more that we can involve employers in understanding the why on the data collection side, we can all sort of build a better and more visible career path that will not only benefit the individual, but ultimately benefit employers as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so much opportunity for us all to think about how can we focus on, particularly with so many business leaders in the room as well. In closing, I have one more question for each of you. And I feel like when we talk about important topics, we often think about what would be the magic wand you would wave, or what's the big idea you would have. But I would love for us to all end on, what do we want to be true in the shorter term? Let's give ourselves a 2-year horizon. And if we think that data is a key element to really be able to bridge the divide between education and work, what is your hope, your wish for what can be true in 2 years to bridge the data divide between education and work. I'll start with you, Stephen, and move this way, and we can end with you, Commissioner Thomas.
Yeah, and I'll be brief with this. We're working right now with our state stakeholders and higher education institutions on developing our strategic higher education master plan, and to be able to more finally connect those pathways from K-12, from adult learner status onto the careers. But the data expansion that we need to engage in, and working very closely with, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback here, working very closely with our cabinet agencies through TN Data, our P20 system, to make that data more accessible and clear and transparent. That is something that we are all actively working on, and I think 2 years is a great horizon for that.
My hope is that the value proposition of creating this data, generating, sustaining the existence of these education to work data, that this value proposition is very clear to everyone who is responsible and who can really have the power to make it work. So for instance, if you're an employer, as Commissioner Denise Thomas was just saying, it has to be very clear for you that this is not something, a favor you're doing, but something that will inform and help you retain the skilled, the diverse talent that you need, like to thrive as a business. If you're an educator, it has to be very clear and true for you that making the effort to create, to sustain this kind of like data reporting will help you better inform how we design your curriculum, how you support your students. If you are a policymaker, it has to be clear to you that this is part of designing and delivering and public policy that will leverage your ability to create more shared prosperity. So I think this is my hope, that the value is really clear, self-evident. We all know this is important. We'll just keep doing it, not stop.
Yeah, and I would say that in 2 years, you could have a goal that you're using the credential impact framework to produce reports and insights that are using the data that you currently have to really show to what extent you have learners moving through that framework and into these credentials of value. And I think within 2 years, you can make meaningful progress to enhance those systems where you need to address some of those gaps for the non-degree credential, for the employment wages, and setting that up for 5 years down the road, truly being able to utilize that data in the way that you need to long-term.
I think I would want to see us increase the amount of data from a quantity perspective, but then also improve data quality. Because it's not just about how much, it's also how good is it. And what my fellow panelists said as well, making sure that it's very clear and concise so everyone can really understand where they need to be, and also what we need to do, from a state perspective, to evaluate the effectiveness of the framework and then tweak our program design along the way. We have a tendency to collect data, and we got 10 years worth of data. But if you wait for 10 years, that's a long time to go without improving anything. So I think discernible use of the data, but also using it to evaluate more frequently and often so that we can improve outcomes for individuals as they sort of move along. And I think we have a real opportunity to do that. I wish we could do it in 2 days, but 2 years is probably more feasible.
Thank you each for that. I think there is so much here that we have opportunity to collaborate on as Tennesseans to help really bring this opportunity to light and ensure that we're not leaving it up to luck, and that Tennessee students and Tennesseans do have the opportunity to pursue pathways that lead them to economic opportunity and ensure our state continues to have the economic opportunity that we have had. So thank you to our panelists. I am grateful for each of you. In just a moment, there will be instructions for lunch, which is right after this, but please join me in thanking our panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, please exit the ballroom. Make your way through the buffet. We will begin the Spark sessions promptly at 12:30.